Hi everyone. In this video, I will be leading us through the 2023-2024 free application for federal student aid. This application is for students applying for aid for the 2023-24 academic year. We will complete this application as a dependent student, which means the student will have to provide parent information. Many students are considered dependent. But in order to see if you are considered dependent or independent for the purposes of the FAFSA, please consult the link provided in the description box below. You'll want to start by visiting FAFSA.gov on one of the preferred browsers, so Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, or Apple Safari. You might want to clear the cache before starting the application for the best user experience possible. So you'll start by clicking Start Here. You'll start by selecting your role. For instance, if you select I am a student, then you will log in with your student FSA ID. We recommend students create their FSA ID at least 3 days in advance of starting their FAFSA. This will allow enough time for processing so that your FSA ID can get approved before you start your FAFSA. If you are a dependent student and need to provide information about your parent or parents on the FAFSA form, one of your parents should create their own FSA ID if they have a Social Security number. If your parents do not have a Social Security number, there are other options that we will talk about later. We encourage people to not use this last option, where you can use personal identifiers to get started on the FAFSA. The reason we do not recommend this is because if you don't already have an FSA ID when you start the FAFSA, then you will have to create one by the end of the application. It's good to go ahead and create your FSA ID at the start. If you already have your FSA ID, then you can click Login to continue. So you'll log in using your username and password. Next, you'll see a pop-up that informs you that you are completing an application that is shared with and monitored by the U.S. Department of Education. I'm going to hit Accept. And here's where we're going to select which FAFSA to complete. I am currently using a demo site in order to do this practice application with you. So I see the option to start over or continue. Your screen might look a little bit different, but we want to start the 2023-24 application. Again, this is for students applying for aid for the 2023-24 academic year. So typically fall 2023 and spring 2024. Students who plan to take college courses in the summer might need to reach out to their intended college to ask which application to complete. Which FAFSA you complete for the summer semester varies from college to college, so it's important to ask the college or university which FAFSA you should complete if you're going to be attending summer semester. Remember, you will complete a FAFSA each year that you'll be in college. A save key saves the progress of your application in case you don't finish the application in one sitting. It's between 4 and 8 characters that can be numbers or letters, so you could do something simple. The save key provides applicants a way to share access to their FAFSA form for their parent or parents to add information and sign it. If you forget the save key, you can reset it. The application is saved for 45 days, unless the applicant submits their application for processing prior to that. Here you'll see a series of frequently asked questions and their answers. which we're going to skip over today because hopefully I'll be able to answer all of those for you during today's demo. And now we start in student demographics. As you proceed through all of these sections of the FAFSA, if you're ever confused about if it's asking about the student or the parent, just pay attention to this banner up here along the top. It'll say who it's referencing. So it has already pulled over the information associated with my FSA ID. So in this case, I see the practice name, social security number, and date of birth. So I'm going to hit continue. Here you'll make sure to include an email address. You'll want to include a personal email address and not an email address that could be changed or deactivated, such as an email attached to a student's high school or workplace. You can also add a telephone number, and while not mandatory, it is beneficial for you to include an email address on the FAFSA form in order to receive important communications about your financial aid. When a student creates an FSA ID, adding and verifying an email address or telephone number will also make the account recovery process easier if you ever need to unlock your account, retrieve a forgotten username, or reset a forgotten password. Next, you want to enter your permanent mailing address. So I'm going to do Demopolis, Alabama. And then I will hit continue. It will ask if you've lived in your state for at least 5 years. In this case, I'll say yes. If you say no, then it will ask what is your state of legal residence, and if you became a legal resident before a certain date. But for the purposes of this practice, I'm going to select yes, I have lived in Alabama for at least 5 years. Next, it's going to ask for my citizenship status. There are 3 options to the question, are you a U.S. citizen? So I can say, yes, I am a U.S. citizen or U.S. national. The second option says, no, but I am an eligible non-citizen. The most common category of eligible non-citizen is that of permanent resident or someone with a green card. But there are other categories as well, such as refugee or asylee. You will be asked for your alien registration number if you select this option. If you are not a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, the third option you can select is no, I am neither. In that case, you aren't eligible for federal student aid. However, if you've been granted DACA or deferred action for childhood arrivals and have a social security number, you might still complete the FAFSA form to determine your eligibility for state or college aid, even if you aren't eligible for federal aid. But again, for this practice, I am going to select yes, I am a U.S. citizen. Next, we will see high school completion status when you begin college in the 2023-2024 school year. So if you are currently a high school senior, in this scenario, we'll say you have a high school diploma by the time you begin college in the 2023-24 school year. And then it asks what college degree or certificate will you be working on when you begin the 2023-2024 school year. If this is your first time going to college, it's important to answer this correctly. So you could say, I'm going after a technical certificate, or I'm doing a 2-year associate degree, or my first bachelor's degree. So I'll say first bachelor's degree. And then it asks, will I have my first bachelor's degree before I begin the 2023-2024 school year? The answer is going to be no if I am a current high school senior. And as you can see, this has already been answered for me. And then it will ask, what will my college grade level be when I begin the 2023-2024 school year? If you're a senior in high school at this very moment, you're going to say, never attended college, first year. Even if you took things like dual enrollment or advanced placement classes and you have some college credits to your name on your transcript, what the FAFSA is really wondering here is, have you applied for or received federal aid for your college education before? And as a high school senior, even if you did dual enrollment, the answer is going to be no. So again, I'm going to say never attended college before / first year. And now it's going to ask if you're interested in work study. These are part-time jobs, typically on a college campus, that offer a flexible work schedule and help you earn money to cover some of your educational expenses. If you're interested at all in working at least part-time during college, I would say yes to this question, so that you can at least be considered for the pool of applicants for work-study jobs at your college or university. Not all colleges participate in work-study, so if you're wondering if a college participates, check with the financial aid office of the college. Driver's license is actually one of the questions that you can skip on the FAFSA. So if you don't have a driver's license, you don't have to put anything here. But I would definitely recommend filling this out if you do have a driver's license. You'll put the number as well as the driver's license state. The FAFSA will ask if you were a foster youth or if at any time you were put in the foster care system. So I'm going to put no. It's also going to ask the highest education level that your parents completed. So these are your biological or adoptive parents and no one else. And if you don't know the answer or don't have contact with one or both of them, you can select other/unknown. So I'm going to say my parents both completed high school. Alright, so we've finished the student demographics section, and now we're on to the school selection. So we're going to add our high school. I'm going to pick one in Demopolis, Alabama. So you can see when I typed the word Demopolis and clicked search, it gave me one option, which is the correct option. I'm going to select and press continue. If you get multiple options, please be sure that you select the correct one. This is very important for your high school to be able to track its FAFSA completion. And once all this information looks correct, I'm going to confirm that this is the correct high school and click continue. Now you can add up to 10 colleges and universities that you're considering, and each of those colleges will get a copy of your FAFSA information. So you can look up your college or university using the search feature, or you can input the federal school code if you know it. Not many people will know the school code, so you can search by state, city, and name. So you do have to put the state, and then the other two fields are optional. So if I were to click search, it would show me all the colleges in Alabama. So I'm going to start narrowing it down. So I'm going to add Shelton State Community College. It gives me one option, so I'm going to select that yes, that is the college I intended. If I click View College Info under the school name, I'm going to get a page with more details about the school. This might be useful to read as you're considering and comparing colleges. There's information like average annual cost, graduation rate, retention rate, and transfer rate. So I'm going to close out of this now. And since I have the box checked, I'm going to click Continue. And if I really only want to put one school, then I would select my housing plan and press Continue. But I'm going to add one more school. I'm also going to add the University of Alabama. You'll see that it pulls up several different options, and I am wanting to select the Tuscaloosa campus, so I'm going to click the second option here. Now that I have the schools that I want to receive my FAFSA information, I'm going to answer the question about housing. The FAFSA will ask for my housing plan for each of the colleges that I've added. This doesn't necessarily affect how much aid you'll receive, but it allows each college to better estimate your cost of attendance and expected expenses. So it's important to answer this to the best of your ability so the college can have an idea of your plans. If you don't know yet, you can always give it your best guess. For Shelton State, I will select off campus with the intention of living in an apartment. And for UA, I will select on campus with the intention of living in a residence hall. You can add up to 10 schools when first submitting the FAFSA. The order of the schools may affect your eligibility for state aid, so check the link in the description box to see if your state has any special requirements for the order. You can change the order using these arrows here. For Alabama, the order does not matter. So school selection is done, and now we're moving on to dependency status, which is the section of the FAFSA that's going to determine whether or not you need to provide parent information. So the first question, what is your marital status as of today? I'm going to say not married, single. The next question is, do you now have or will you have children who will receive more than half of their support from you between July 1st, 2023 and June 30th, 2024? So essentially, if you have or will have a baby of your own or child of your own that you're providing more than half of the financial support for. So I'm going to answer no. Do you have dependents other than your children or spouse who live with you and receive more than half of their support from you now and through June 30th, 2024? So, if you're financially caring for a younger sibling, for example, in this case I'm going to say no, I don't have anyone who's living with me and relying on me financially. Now on to the remaining dependency questions. Select all that apply or none of the above. Are you currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? At any time since you turned age 13, Were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care? Or were you a dependent or ward of the court? As determined by a court in your state of legal residence, are you or were you an emancipated minor? Does someone other than your parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of you as determined by a court in your legal state of residence? Please note that legal guardianship is different from legal custody, and you should have paperwork or court documentation to prove this. So, by legal guardianship, we mean that it's court appointed. There's court documentation to back it up if you check yes to this question. In this case, I'm going to say no, so none of the above. The very last question it will ask to determine if the FAFSA needs parental information from you is this. On or after July 1st, 2022, were you homeless or were you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? And the definition here is pretty broad. Homeless means lacking fixed, regular, and adequate housing. You can click the little icon next to the question to find more information. You may be homeless if you're living in shelters, parks, motels, hotels, public spaces, camping grounds, cars, abandoned buildings, or you're temporarily living with other people because you have nowhere else to go. Also, if you're living in any of these situations and fleeing an abusive parent, you may be considered homeless even if your parent would otherwise provide a place to live. If you answer yes to this question, what you will likely need is a letter of support from, for example, the homeless liaison at your school or school district, or work with your college to see what other documentation they will accept to prove that this situation is true. In this scenario, though, I'm going to say no. Okay, so the application has determined, based on my answers, that I am a dependent student, meaning I do need to provide parental information. So in this case, I'm going to show you what it looks like to provide parent information on the FAFSA. However, if you are a dependent, but you're still truly incapable of getting your parents' information, for example, maybe you don't have contact with them anymore, that might be something where you can make an appeal with your college or university. So if you are in a special circumstance, what you can say is, I am unable to provide information about my parents. The FAFSA will explain what will happen if a student makes this selection. Here's the impact of not providing parent information. The following are special circumstances. Your parents are incarcerated, you have left home due to an abusive family environment, you do not know where your parents are and are unable to contact them, and you have not yet been adopted. You are older than 21 but not yet 24, are unaccompanied, and are either homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. The FAFSA indicates here that the following are not considered special circumstances. So you do have the option to say, I have a special circumstance and I am unable to provide parent information. Or if you do not fit in one of the scenarios for special circumstances, you can say, I do not have a special circumstance and I am submitting my FAFSA form without parent information to apply for an unsubsidized loan only. Know that aid is very limited in this situation. But today I will provide parent information, so I'm going to select the first option. Whose information should I provide? So we've moved to the parent demographic section of the FAFSA. It's important to note that for the purposes of the FAFSA, a parent is a biological or adoptive parent or step-parent. You'll see that the application provides these different scenarios and guides you on how to proceed. For instance, if your parents are, say, divorced, and you live with one parent more than the other, then you're going to report information about the parent you lived with more in the last 12 months in the parent information and parent demographics section. If that parent is remarried, report information for their spouse as well. You can click through each of these options to see whose information you need to provide on the FAFSA. In the description box of the video, you'll find a flowchart called Who's My Parent Flowchart that will guide you through questions in sequence to determine whose information to report. It is very important that you're providing the information for the correct parent according to the FAFSA's definition of parent. So carefully read through each of these descriptions. So as of today, what is the marital status of your parents? So literally, as of the moment you're filling out the FAFSA, your options are never married, unmarried and both legal parents living together, married or remarried, divorced or separated, or widowed. So in this case, we're looking at the biological or adoptive parents. If your parents are married as of today, then it's pretty straightforward. We're going to put married. Let's say your parents are divorced or separated as of today and do not live together. In that case, we need to figure out who is the FAFSA parent. The FAFSA again requires you to report the parent that you've lived with more over the course of the last 12 months. It cares more about the living situation. If your situation is completely 50-50, meaning you spend time with each parent equally, in that case you go with the parent who provides more financial support. But again, that's a secondary thing. The first thing that you look at in this situation is which parent you lived with more over the last 12 months. That's the parent you're required to report on the FAFSA. If that person is still divorced or separated, so they're single today, then you would keep this answer and you would tell us when the divorce or separation happened, just the month and the year. However, if your FAFSA parent has remarried, you need to then put remarried. List the month and year that they got married to their current spouse, and then you have to list both that parent and that step-parent's information. Again, revisit the scenarios that are listed on the previous page or look at the flowchart in the description box. But for the purposes of this scenario, I'm going to answer married with no prior divorce involved. And then I'm going to put the date that they were married, October 2001. Now it's going to ask the demographic information for the parents, meaning their social security number if they have one, last name exactly as seen on the social security card if they have one, first initial, and date of birth, as well as their email address. If your parent does not have a social security number, enter all zeros here. Do not enter an individual taxpayer identification number or ITIN here. Now, if your parent does have a social security number, you must enter it carefully and correctly here. I recommend entering in an email address where possible. Again, go ahead and make a note that parent 1 equals whatever that parent's name is, and parent 2 equals whatever the other parent's name is. And now it wants information for parent 2 if the marital status or living situation that I indicated prompts for a second parent. Just like it asked me if I've lived in Alabama for 5 years as the student, it's going to ask the same question of the parents. Now we move on to other people in the household. So when the FAFSA is calculating your financial need, it's taking into account more than just income. It's also taking into account how far does that money really go, right? Like how many people are figuratively relying on the parents, and how many of those people in the household are in college. Because all of these things could impact your ability to pay for school. I'm going to report my parents' other children, even if they're not physically living with us. As long as my parents are providing more than half their financial support between July 1st, 2023 and June 30th, 2024, or those children could answer no to all the dependency questions that we did earlier. Remember, you can click the link to remind yourself of those questions. The link is in the description box. So in this case, I want to ask, how many other dependent children do your parents have? Let's say in this scenario, there's a 6th grade sibling who's living at home. That person's going to be a member of the household. If you have, let's say, an older brother who's maybe 20 and doesn't live in the house, if he answered no to all of his dependency questions on the FAFSA, we can also count him in the house, even if he's living in the dorms, for example, and not physically living with the parents. And so I'm going to say there are 2 siblings in the household. We can also count other people in the household as long as they now live with the parents. If that living situation is going to persist, and then if my parents provide more than half of their financial support. So it asks, how many other dependents do your parents have? And then it lists the criteria for them to be considered members of the household. So for example, if grandma and grandpa are living at home and your parents take care of them by providing most of the financial support, then I would count grandma and grandpa as members of the household. In this scenario though, I'm going to say nobody else lives in the household. So I'm going to leave this as 0 and then click continue. You can see that the application is adding up the numbers for you. So it's a household of 5, including you, your parents, your younger sibling, and your older sibling who's already in college. And then of the 3 dependents in your parents' household, how many will be college students between July 1st, 2023 and June 30th, 2024? So do include yourself and anyone else in the household who will be in college at least half time, but do not include your parents. So in my situation, I'll say 2 to include myself and the 20-year-old older brother who's in college. So for this application cycle, 2021 taxes are used. The 2023-2024 FAFSA uses 2021 tax information. So by this time, most people have filed 2021 taxes. In this case, it's going to ask if my parents already completed the 2021 tax return. and you have three options for answering: already completed, will file, or not going to file. Already completed is going to be the case for most people. You can also say will file or not going to file if they don't have a federal income tax return. Some people aren't required to file taxes. For instance, you don't have to start filing a federal income tax return until you meet a specific threshold by having a certain level of income. If you say will file, you have to indicate what type of return will be filed and what the filing status will be. Then you will go through a process of estimating the numbers using 2020 taxes, which will have to be updated after actually filing 2021 taxes. In today's example, though, I'm going to say that 2021 taxes have already been completed. Then it asks what type of income tax return did the parents file for 2021. Most people will say IRS 1040. However, if your parents filed a foreign tax return, you can put that they filed a foreign tax return or a tax return in Puerto Rico or another U.S. territory or freely associated state. It will then ask for the filing status on the 2021 return. These are the little boxes at the top of the 1040 form. So you have the option to file as single, head of household, married filed joint return, married filed separate return, qualifying widow or widower, or don't know. You should double check the boxes at the top of the 1040 to see what the filing status was. If you're not sure, you can click the question mark in order to see a screenshot of where exactly you should look on the tax form. Here you see right below the top line of the 1040, there is the question about filing status. Clicking the question mark throughout the FAFSA can be especially helpful in the financial sections of the application. So we're going to select Married Filed Joint. Now, there's a tool that allows you to import tax information directly from the IRS. It's called the IRS Data Retrieval Tool, or DRT. And if you want to use it and can use it, which we highly encourage you to do because it saves time and effort, it also potentially saves you from having to provide additional information to your college. You click Proceed to the IRS, and at this point the parent logs in with their FSA ID. Remember, for dependent students, both the parent and the student should create their own FSA ID. If the parent does not have a Social Security number, though, they will not be able to create the FSA ID. But for a parent who does have a Social Security number, they should have their own FSA ID. They need to enter the username and password here. But if they need to create an FSA ID, then they can start that process now. Now, because this is a practice FAFSA, I'm not going to be able to show you what it looks like in order to use the IRS data retrieval tool. And that's because there's no tax return to actually pull from the IRS. But if you choose to use this, what you'll see is that once you successfully enter your FSA ID username and password, you will be sent over to the IRS website. You'll have to validate your identity by typing in your address, exactly as it appears on your 1040. And it's very, very picky here. So again, you want to have your tax forms in front of you, and you want to type the address exactly as it appears on your return, so that the system can match that information and pull the tax information through to the FAFSA. That way you don't have to enter in this tax information manually. But since we're not able to use the IRS data retrieval tool, we'll come to the FAFSA and we'll enter it all in manually. If we had successfully matched our information in the IRS DRT, it will have already pulled all of our tax information through for us. So the first question is, what is your parents' gross income for 2021? This is found on the 1040, line 11. So in this practice scenario, I'm going to say the adjusted gross income was $45,000. Now it's going to ask about parent income from work, how much they earned from wages, salaries, and tips. Now, even if you use the IRS data retrieval tool, if you have two parents, it's still going to ask you to type out what parent 1 made from working versus what parent 2 made from working. This can seem kind of frustrating if you've used the IRS DRT, but if you ever look at a married filed joint return, it actually doesn't really clearly delineate what two separate earners made from working. But a couple of ways you can separate this out is by looking at your parents' separate W-2 forms or other income documents if they have them. In Alabama, you can reference the Schedule W-2 on the Alabama state return if your parents filed a state return as well in 2021. The Schedule W-2 will break down earnings by each taxpayer, and so you can see, based on the Social Security number of the parent in column A, whose W-2 is whose, and that will help you break it down for line 1 of the 1040. You might still need to look at the W-2 to get any tip information from box 8. Then you have to break it down by parent for Schedule 1 and Schedule K1. Some of these schedules might not apply to your family, so you might not have them. I'm going to say that out of that $45,000, parent 1 made $20,000 and parent 2 made $25,000. It's important to follow the equation listed on the screen. So we want to look at the IRS Form 1040, the very first line of the return. And then if you have a Schedule 1, and not everyone does, so if it's not stapled to your tax return, you likely don't have it. But if you do have a Schedule 1, if there's anything on lines 3 and 6, you want to add that into the equation. And then if you have a Schedule K1 or Form 1065, which again you might not have, you'll take box 14, code A. So we're going to add all those figures together to figure out what parent 1 made from working and what parent 2 made from working. Now it's going to ask you about Schedule 1 specifically. If your parents don't have a Schedule 1, you say no. If your parents do have a Schedule 1 and it's not filed just to report unemployment compensation, educator expenses, IRA deduction, student loan interest deduction, or Alaska Permanent Fund dividend, in that case, you'll select yes. You'll be asked if either parent is a dislocated worker, and this is very specifically defined when you click the question mark. So you can see if any of those apply. It includes things like being laid off or experiencing other kinds of hardship. Now it asks, in 2021 or 2022, did you, your parents, or anyone in your parents' household receive benefits from any of the federal benefits programs listed below? Check all that apply or none of the above. So it has things like Medicaid, supplemental security income, supplemental nutrition assistance program, free or reduced price lunch, temporary assistance for needy families, and special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children. For the purposes of this scenario, I'm going to say that no, my parents did not have a Schedule 1. Next, we're going to enter the amount of our parents' income tax for 2021. Again, read this very carefully because we're only looking for Form 1040, line 22. And then if you have a Schedule 2, again, you might not have one. If there's anything inside of line 2, we're going to subtract that from Form 1040, line 22. If you don't have a Schedule 2, we're just going to be paying attention to 1040, line 22. I'm going to say my parents' income tax for 2021 was 0. Next up, if your parents received combat pay, we'll put that here. If your parents are in college and they receive student grants and scholarship aid reported to the IRS, they're going to put that here. If your parents claimed education credits on their taxes, so these are things like the American Opportunity Tax Credit or Lifetime Learning Tax Credit, we'll put that here. If so, they'll have a Schedule 3 attached to their tax return, and we'll look at line 3. Again, if there's no Schedule 3 attached to your tax return, you can skip that part. Next up, we have untaxed portions of IRA distributions and pensions. We're going to look at your tax return 1040, lines 4A and 5A. And then if you have lines 4B and 5B, we're going to subtract those from lines 4A and 5A. Again, if those lines on your tax return are blank, that's going to be a 0 here. Next up are things like IRA deductions, which we're going to look at the tax return Schedule 1. Again, you might not have a Schedule 1, but if you do, if there's anything on lines 16 and 20, we want to report it here. Lastly, tax-exempt interest income from IRS Form 1040, line 2A. If there's anything in line 2A, type it here. If not, you can type 0. If there's a negative number, you can also type 0, and that's true for any field on the FAFSA here. Again, if you ever get stuck on any of these questions or you need more details about what it's asking, click the little question mark icon and it will come up with additional details to help you figure out exactly what it's going after. It often gives you a handy screenshot of the form or the schedule that you're looking for. So if I scroll down here, I see that it's asking for 2A for tax-exempt interest. Next up is financial information that we cannot find on the tax return. This is just information your parents will either have or not have. They'll know if the situation applies to them. So first up, if your parents paid child support, they're going to put the amount that they paid over the course of 2021 here. If they had earnings from a cooperative education program, they'll report that here. If your parents are in college and they had a work-study job or need-based employment through a college or university, they're going to put their earnings in this last box. Next up, if your parents are receiving child support, you're going to put the total amount they received in 2021 in this first box. If they're receiving housing, food, or other living expenses as a member of the military or as a member of the clergy of the church, they're going to put that here. Payments to tax-deferred pension and retirement savings plans is a little bit of a tricky question, but you can find the answer on the W-2. If you're having a hard time locating your parents' W-2, save the FAFSA and come back to it later. You really don't want to guess here. A lot of people don't think that they have this, and they do. So again, on your W-2, we're looking at boxes 12. And there are certain codes that we're looking for in boxes 12A through 12D. Codes D, E, F, G, H, and S. We do not want to include any amount reported in code DD. If your parents are receiving veterans non-education benefits like disability, death, DIC, or VA educational work-study allowances, you would want to put that here. And then if you had any other untaxed income not reported, such as workers' compensation or disability benefits, you can put that here. One tricky thing here, if you click the question mark, it specifies a little more detail, and it says that you do not want to include untaxed Social Security benefits or supplemental security income. So again, always click the box if you're unsure exactly what the question is asking for. Next, you'll be asked information about your parents' assets. If you're presented with the option to skip the questions about your parents' assets, you may do so by clicking yes and pressing continue. However, some people might see a screen asking them if their parents' assets exceed a certain threshold. In that case, they will need to evaluate if their parents' assets exceed the amount that is listed. So just for the purposes of practicing, I'm going to click no so you can see what the FAFSA considers as assets. Again, if you have the option to skip, you are always welcome to do so. When it asks about assets, it's asking, as of today, what is your parents' total current balance of cash, savings, and checking accounts? For instance, I could say $1,500. As of today, what is the net worth of your parents' investments, including real estate, but not your parents' home? And then last, as of today, what is the net worth of your parents' current businesses and/or investment farms? Don't include a family farm or family business with 100 or fewer full-time or full-time equivalent employees. Now let's look at some of the details for these questions. For instance, what is the FAFSA considering as investments? Investments include things like trust funds, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, other securities. So it's important to look at how the terms are being defined. And to recap all of this, or to rephrase it, the things that do not count as assets here would be the home that you live in, the cars that you drive, your retirement account, or if you have a business or farm with fewer than 100 employees. Those things do not count as assets on the FAFSA. But again, because we're presented with the option to skip, we're going to do so. So that is the parent financial information. Now we've switched over from asking about parents to asking about the student again. So we're going to put the student's financial information here. So did the student file taxes in 2021? If you did, you're going to follow basically the same steps that I just went over for the parents. However, many high schools are not going to be filing a federal income tax return because they didn't meet the filing threshold. However, some high school students might file taxes, or they might do so just to receive a refund. But for this scenario, I'm going to say not going to file. If the student did file taxes, they can link to their taxes with the IRS data retrieval tool the same way that the parent had the opportunity to. So next it's going to ask about income and assets. In this case, if you made maybe a few $100 from part-time work, that's not enough to require you to file a federal income tax return. You can look up IRS Publication 17 if you're interested in finding out how much money you would have to earn in 2021 in order to start filing a federal income tax return by law. In this case, I'm going to say I had $400 from working part-time. Next, I'm asked about additional financial information. Again, most of these questions are the exact same as what we saw on the parent financial information section. And then for assets, since we have the option to skip, we're going to skip here. Now we've reached a summary, but we're not done yet. So you can see all of the FAFSA information that we have entered for the entire application in a nice, neat, clean form. So you can kind of read through, make sure everything is accurate. This is going to look pretty similar to the student aid report that the student will receive after submission. As long as everything looks good, we're just going to go all the way to the bottom. And then we're going to click continue. Then we get to the sign and submit section. But before we sign and submit, we're going to be asked some questions about our demographics. These questions do not affect aid eligibility, and they're merely to collect demographic information. The student does have the option to decline to answer. Here we're agreeing to the terms outlined above, and we're certifying that all the information is true and complete to the best of our knowledge. Now, dependent students will also need to provide the signature of one of their parents. They will need to agree to the terms and then sign in with their FSA ID if they have one. I mentioned earlier that if your parent doesn't have a social security number, they're not going to be able to create an FSA ID. What you do in that circumstance, when you get to the parent signature page, you're going to choose other options. I'll show you how to do that. You're going to choose other options to sign and submit. Then you have the option to print a signature page, which you can then sign, date, and mail to the appropriate address. Again, this is for parents who can't create an FSA ID or those parents who do not have a social security number. For parents who can create an FSA ID, they will want to log in with that ID and sign the FAFSA electronically, as that is the fastest way to submit an application. But let's say that we need to print the parent page. In that case, we can print the page, sign, date, and mail to the address that is listed. Now, this is extremely important, especially for students who are dependent for the purposes of the FAFSA. You want to make sure that both the student and the parent have signed the FAFSA before clicking Submit My FAFSA Form Now. Again, the fastest way is for both student and parent to sign electronically with their FSA ID, but we recognize that not everyone will have this option. But you do want to make sure that you click Submit. After that, you'll get a congratulations screen. This is saying that you have submitted your application. You should also receive an email confirmation if you listed an email address on your application. Once you've gotten to this screen, you have submitted your application, but there's a few things that you need to continue to do afterwards. If you provided an email address, you need to monitor that inbox closely to see if you've received any follow-up communications from either Federal Student Aid or any of the financial aid offices of the colleges where you've applied. There could possibly be follow-up tasks for you to do even after submitting your FAFSA. You can consult the What Happens Next resource linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching.